This smartphone represents the end of perhaps the most exciting and innovative smartphone makers of all time. And I'm not sure about you, but I can't stop talking about this company, and this phone in particular is something from the future despite being half a decade old. It's wacky, somewhat controversial, and in retrospect a mind-boggling idea that was actually executed and sold to the public. What a wild ride. So in this episode of Golden Era, let's talk about that. Hey guys, I'm Ryan Thomas and this is the LG Wing. I'm sure most of you have already guessed that by now. The way ahead of its time flagship that also wasn't a flagship and demanded serious money regardless. It was a really strange smartphone. Up until this point, LG had been big name players in smartphone innovation, from the early years to the important ones around the S3 to the S5's prominence, right up to LG's own V30 and V40. LG had always given great options with expandable storage and onboard hardwired audio solutions, not to speak of the additional displays, the modular components, the camera innovations, like multiple focal lengths and log recording, long before the iPhone had that kind of feature. LG Mobile was no stranger to releasing wacky and eccentric phones, pushing the boundaries of what people expected smartphones to be and to do. The LG Wing launched in late 2020, a time when the world was in limbo and arguably the golden era of smartphones. You know, the year before we just had the Huawei P30 Pro, the OnePlus 7 Pro, the Galaxy S10 series, with this year's offerings being the S20 Ultra, the iPhone 12 Pro Max and the OnePlus Nord not doing too badly either. Generally though, money was tight with a sizable chunk of people not able to work due to the world health issues at the time and the knock-on effects that we're still feeling to this day. So what did LG do in this awkward and anxious time? It launched this thing, this absolutely alien looking device that seemed to take a foldable hype which Samsung had kind of introduced with the Galaxy Fold the year prior and then completely flip it, or I guess swivel it, on its head with a phone that offered two displays in a radically different style. The T-Post meme had actually been around for a few years up to this point. I'm not sure if LG Mobile knew or was aware of this, but its wing definitely embodied the meme. By the way guys, really trying to hit 500,000 subscribers, so if you wouldn't mind hitting that button, it would really help us out. Thank you very much. The Wing released to generally quite positive reviews, hovering around the 7 to 8 out of 10 mark, thanks to its innovative design, decent battery life, solid displays, and rich feature list both in hardware and in software. Some reviewers disliked its camera system, which is a wild one we'll sort of talk about a bit later, and the fact that it was big, thick and heavy. Necessarily so, but not far off a brick that you'd be carrying around in your pocket all day. Perhaps most controversially, it launched at $999 US, at a time when a lot of people were sort of struggling for money, and despite this price tag, it offered a mid-range chipset, thanks to the Qualcomm Snapdragon 765G 5G, backed by a pretty reasonable RAM actually, 8GB, and then the storage was 128 or 256 gigs, but it was expandable via microSD card slot. It was a strange concoction of impressive physical hardware, dampened by the specs, with some bizarre cameras and a price that, whilst totally understandable for what this thing is, made the Wing a really tough sell. I really want to talk about the cameras for a second because this is absolutely wild. Firstly, being a wacky phone for the time, of course, it had to come with a motorized pop-up selfie camera. How many of you still actually want this feature in a smartphone today? But that's actually not the craziest part of the Wing. It had a standard 64 megapixel 1/1.72 inch wide camera, which was actually pretty decent, but then a pair of ultra wide cameras, one being slightly bigger with a higher field of view than the other. Both main and ultra wide in the normal camera app can load up and shoot 4K video, but when you open the camera with the screen swung out, these cameras go into what LG called gimbal mode, where they used a mix of optical and digital stabilization to replicate gimbal movements in captured video. It was around this time that gimbals were actually quite popular in the consumer world, so it made sense that they included it. In fairness, it actually did do a pretty good job. Even if it was locked to full HD in resolution, the quality of the footage certainly wasn't amazing, but if anything, this feature sort of summed up the rest of the phone. Wacky for the sake of wacky. And to be honest, I'm not sure I hate that. It's actually kind of cool. The camera quality in the boring standard mode was half decent, though this certainly wasn't the very peak of what LG Mobile could do with photos. Primarily due to the layout, the fact I had two ultra-wide cameras, no telephoto to speak of, and the cameras actually did sit relatively flush to the back of the device, I'm sure thanks to the additional thickness that this thing has versus a standard phone. Because yes, the wing was big, it was heavy. Comparing it to the most recent foldable offerings even, it's easy to see why reviewers lamented its heft. Honor's own dual screen V5 from 2025 is considerably thinner than this, despite the fact it has two insane displays on it, and it has loads of much better hardware internally. This is a 260-gram phone, more than a lot of foldables, but also quite a lot more than your average big slab on the market today. That isn't for lack of features though, because there is a lot going on in the wing. Many weren't a fan of the omission of the headphone port in this thing, despite LG's long history of including great audio connectors in its mobiles, but you still had the likes of microSD expansion for storage, 5G thanks to the specific use of that chipset, Qi wireless charging, IP54 weatherproofing, MIL STD810G compliance, and an optical in-display fingerprint reader on the top screen. So there is actually quite a lot of hardware here for your money. The software, much like, well, previous LG phones, is where things start to get a little bit spotty. It launched with Android 10 and there were mixed feelings around whether LG Mobile had done enough to really make use of that hardware in software. There is the obvious layout with adoptions in the camera app, for example, that splits over both screens, but a lot is to do with multitasking here and actually using multiple apps at the same time. It is quite handy opening a text box on the big screen and being able to type on the smaller one because it doesn't cover up anything on that main display. But there's a fine line between sort of gimmicky and actually useful features here, and depending on who was using it and reviewing it at the time, the thought process sort of meandered. My unit, which is from the US, is unfortunately stuck on Android 10 unless I go out of my way to flash custom software on here, whereas there are wing owners out there that have their official device on Android 13, so there's going to be a mixed bag there. LG Mobile was never really known for great long-term software support anyway, and they weren't going to fix it with the wing after, let's face it, over a decade's worth of back catalogue. This wasn't technically the final phone from LG. There were a few mid-rangers and of course the LG Velvet, which sort of did its own kind of weird thing. But the wing really felt like the nail in the coffin or the catalyst for the firm to back out, or maybe fall out, of the ever-competitive smartphone market. The wing never took off, though has enjoyed a recent bump in popularity thanks to a couple of big names in the tech space making videos on it. But for now though, LG Mobile is not making smartphones, and that's something that 10 years ago you would have laughed at. The unfortunate reality is that people don't want wacky or different. They want their phone to fill out a tick list of criteria, one that can be almost universally used across all handsets. The wing helped LG Mobile go out with a bang, and they have been sorely missed ever since. I need to hear from you guys about the LG wing. Did you think it was amazing when it came out? Did you buy one? Or is this the first time you're even seeing one even exist and you want to know what the heck was going on with this thing? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear what you have to say about the wing, because it is a bit of a polarizing device to say the least. And whilst you're down there, be sure to hit like if you enjoyed today's content and subscribe to never miss another upload. Thank you all so much for watching. I've been Ryan Thomas and I'll catch you later. Cheers.